Welcome to Drumbeats, the must-listen-to podcast which explains why Indigenous partnerships are the key to securing successful outcomes in natural resource and infrastructure investment in Canada. I'm Mark McNack, and my co-host Robert Brandt and I are joined today by Kahsennenhawe Skydeer, former Grand Chief of Ganawagi and CEO and President Skydeer Consulting. Chief Skydeer shares a role as Grand Chief right in the midst of key negotiations when Hydro-Québec began to rebuild and repair itself. These included working to secure approvals from the U.S. from the New York State Energy Research and Development Authority and addressing concerns from environmental justice groups. Chief Skydeer talks about the interconnectedness of all things, the importance of balance with the natural world, and the role of Indigenous peoples as protectors of the environment. Under her leadership, the community became co-owners of the energy infrastructure, securing a guaranteed 10% equity stake with the opportunity to purchase up to 49%. This was a historic, groundbreaking agreement, the first time a First Nation in Quebec co-owned a major infrastructure project with the Crown Corporation.
Kahsennenhawe, Skydeer, Sego, so great to see you again. Thanks for joining us.
Sego, Rob, now for having me. Hi, Mark. How are you?
Hi, very well, Kahsennenhawe. Welcome back. Great to be speaking with you again.
We're looking forward to our chat today.
You joined us in London for our second annual Canadian Indigenous Investment Summit. And since then, I seem to bump into you at just about every other conference going. You are in demand as a speaker. And I know you've got a lot of other things on your plate. So appreciate the time spending a few minutes with us today.
Absolutely. Thank you for the invite.
You've had a really interesting background and done some things over the years. Why don't you start by telling us about your background, how you rose to Grand Chief, the Mohawks of Ganawagi, and then we'll get into what you're up to today.
Okay, so first off, I grew up in the community here in Ganawagi. Got the privilege to go to Mohawk Immersion School, where I was taught predominantly by, other Mohawk people. So getting to learn my language, culture, and being strong in my identity from a very early age, I think was important, because as I chose to leave the community, go to high school in Montreal and college, and then eventually moving out to Florida at the young age of 20 to pursue a dream to play women's professional tackle football. I always carried that everywhere I went, just being proud of where I came from and being able to speak my language. And after football didn't pay, like I guess any women's sport doesn't have, the equity as you would see with men's sports, I opted to go back to school. I went to, actually, because I graduated from a college in Canada, they didn't transfer all of my credits in Florida. So I had to start community college basically all over. Only my French credits transferred, but it guaranteed me entrance to any Florida university. So because I was already living in Orlando, I opted to just go to UCF, so University of Central Florida, where I graduated in 2008 with a bachelor's degree in psychology, and then subsequently moved back to Ganawagi that summer. And I thought, maybe I would pursue a career in social services or maybe become a psychologist, but quickly that door closed, and they told me come back when I have a master's or a PhD, because that didn't really wouldn't get me far. So I ended up working in a tobacco factory for about 9 months, which, was an experience in itself, but it wasn't what I went to school to do. And I definitely wanted to reach higher and see how I could give back to the community. So the election was happening that summer of 2009, and I ran, and on my first attempt, I was successful. And then started the political career. And I remember my grandmother, my father's mom asking me, what do you know about politics anyways? You just moved back. And I said, well, when you grow up in Kahnawake, you can't help but be political, right? Going through the Oka crisis in 1990 and just, I guess when you figure what's ingrained in your DNA from all your ancestors, we are a very political people. So I said, well, I'm going to learn along the way because that's just, the kind of person I am. And right away, I hit the ground running and got involved in the files and portfolios that I felt resonated with myself, being education, youth, justice and laws, governance. And yeah, so I was a council chief for 12 years. And then unfortunately, our grand chief at the time, Joe Norton, passed away in the middle of the term. Well, more toward the end of the term, but nonetheless, while he was grand chief. So that seat became vacant. And I just remember, talking to my family and people in my circle, like, is this my time? And I know my mom was not too keen, and she was like, it's going to be really hard for you, as the first woman, as a gay woman, maybe you should just stay in the council chief position. You could ride that out as long as you want. And I was like, no, I think it's my time. I'm going to shoot my shot, and no matter what happens, I'm going to be good. Like, I'll just pivot and do something else then if I'm not successful. But as we know, history was made. I did become the first woman grand chief here in the community in 2021. It was one term. I wasn't reelected after, but to me, it was fine because you can't do this kind of job forever. It's very difficult to make people happy. No matter what kind of decision you make, there's naysayers, there's the haters, so after a 15-year career in public service, it was time for me to do something else. I would have loved to have done another term. I think there's some legacy projects, if you will. Like, obviously the Hydro project was a major milestone that we'll get into later, but also being able to cut the ribbon at the opening of our Cultural Arts Center, which will house our new cultural center, museum, theater, and a tourism office. So that is slated for spring of 2026, so upcoming next year. But I still got to stay involved. I'm still the chairperson of the capital campaign, so I'll still, in essence, be there, just not as grand chief, but it's equally going to be bittersweet, and I'm so looking forward to that.
I love that. I'm jealous as well that you speak the language so well. And was it spoken at home? Did you learn it there as well as at school? Because unfortunately for my generation and even my parents, although my grandparents spoke it, they did not speak it around us. And it was a time when they were still almost ashamed of their own culture. And so there was a lost generation, and it's coming back now. But was it all around you growing up?
It definitely wasn't in my home. My mom's not a speaker. My grandparents on my mom's side didn't really speak that much, but it was more my dad's side of the family. Like, all his mom, so my grandmother and all of her sisters, they were all teachers in the school system. So they were, kind of catalyst for language revitalization in the community. So whenever I seen them, it was like an obligation that I had to speak the language, or, they would always talk to me and force me to have to answer. And so, yeah, I definitely had it around me. And, in the community, it was being promoted a lot more because of, like you said, that lost generation and the impacts of residential school and Indian day school, which we did have a few of them here in the community. So, yeah, I always thought it was important. And then, some of my dear friends, when we left elementary school, the kids who knew that we were going to be going to private school in the city would tease us, and they were like, "Oh, you're going to lose your language, and you're just going to not be connected to the community anymore." And so we made it kind of like a vow that we're going to speak as much as we can. So we did. We spoke when we played sports. We spoke at lunch. We spoke when we wanted to talk about other people without them knowing what we were saying. So we found ways to keep it vibrant and alive, even though we, attended school in Montreal.
So just for background for our UK audience, your community is located just outside of Montreal in Quebec?
Yeah, it's like a 15-minute drive to get to the heart of the city. So it's really close. But the beauty of it is we're on the other side of the Mercier Bridge on the South Shore. So it's kind of like we have St. Lawrence Seaway.
St. Lawrence Seaway.
That's right.
Again, our UK investors over here might not exactly know what the South Shore is in the context of Montreal. So on the St. Lawrence Seaway there.
Yeah. So we kind of have our own little nice nooked away community that we're surrounded either by water or, unfortunately, major infrastructure. Everything cuts through our territory. The Mercier Bridge, the highways, 132, 138, Highway 30. So in essence, we're like isolated. But you know what? That's our economy now. And when you look at other First Nations across Canada and Quebec, a lot of them have natural resources, mining, logging. Our resource is our location. And as a result of that, we have a lot of entrepreneurs in Kahnawake. We have a lot of business. I think there's over 600 businesses in the community. So we're thriving in terms of, jobs and economic development. There's still a lot more that we could do, obviously, but, we definitely see our opportunities because of our location and our proximity to downtown Montreal being, more abundant. And we have some great infrastructure here in the community. We have a hospital, right? We have our own hospital here, our own police force, our own fire brigade. So in essence, we're our own self-running community. And I think people would be very surprised and impressed, to see just how good we have it here. And I think that's why it's our responsibility to ensure that other First Nations have the same kind of lifestyle, right? You live in a nice home, 2 cars, be able to go on vacations. I mean, I think that's what everybody would like to provide for their families, and to feel that you're taken care of. And so, I come from a line of hard workers. My grandfather and his 5 brothers were all iron workers. They worked all over the Eastern Coast, New York, Washington, Boston. And so, they were away a lot, and then they would come home on the weekends. But ironworking is what was like the first major industry that brought revenue into this territory.
When you mentioned about the iron industry, is this part of the group that was seen in historic, well, for us now, they're historic photos when they're building the Empire State Building and different business in the States and in Canada? Some of the taller structures were always the Indigenous people were the iron workers going up to these heights. Is that part of that background you're referring to? Yes,
absolutely. When they were building the Dominion Bridge here, connecting South Shore and to the island of Montreal, they were trying to hire the Mohawks just to pick up all of the scraps and, rivets and whatever was left over on the ground. And then, they start scaling all the way to top, and they were like, oh, I guess they're not afraid of heights. Maybe we should hire them to do some connecting or some bolting and, some of the other more dangerous jobs, I guess, if you could call it that. And they opened up to it with open arms, and, I guess the rest is history, as they say. And yeah, you could find those historic documentaries. If you look up Mohawk Skywalkers, Mohawk Ironworkers, there's all kind of documented history. I remember my grandfather worked on the original World Trade Center, the Twin Towers. And I think when I was 12, my mom took me to New York City, and we went up there when you could still go on the observation deck and you could actually feel the building swaying, and, just how proud she was telling me that her father, my grandfather, had worked on that building. And
the days before, there was a lot of or much health and safety considered. No safety ropes, just
Yeah, I know. It's wild to think that they weren't tied off. Yeah, and worked on various bridges, right? Tampan Sea Bridge, Brooklyn Bridge, you name it. There's, like I said, so much documented history of our people, and not just from Ganawage, right? Mohawks from all the different communities, and a lot of natives even from other nations. So they definitely weren't afraid of heights.
It's really interesting. There must have been something in how you approach the world, your ancestors and both of you are Mohawk today, and how you see the world and approach the world.
It's fearless. It's being fearless. That's ultimately what I think it is in our spirituality and our understanding of our time here on earth. It's like, this isn't the end, and we're spirit beings having a human experience. And, we believe in the creator, we believe in our ancestors. So when it's our time to go, as we say, the notch on the stick, then it's our time to go. And in the time that we're here, we try to live without fear and just go through the motions and live life to the fullest. And if ironworking was what was providing, like I said, for families back then, and creating, an opportunity to have a pension, I don't know if you know this, but Native people in Canada weren't entitled to a pension. We weren't eligible. So to have that, from coming from the United States, and the fact that we have the Jay Treaty, which allowed Canadian-born, if I could call it that, natives to go live in the U.S., work in the U.S., go to school there, get a U.S. Social Security card. But our brothers and sisters to the south aren't allowed to come to Canada with the same kind of benefits and privileges. It's unfortunate, but we are working on that. But if it wasn't for that ability, that the U.S. allowed that, I think our reality would have been a lot different. So thankfully, they exercised those rights and were able to traverse freely. They didn't have to have a green card or alien resident card or any of that kind of stuff. They recognized the fact that, as Iroquois Haudenosaunee people, we predated that border when it was installed, and that we had that right to cross freely.
Yeah, absolutely. But as you say, that those rights are not being respected today. But it sounds like you're working on that.
Yeah, we had a table. Well, although I'm not involved in the political sphere right now, but to get some ministers, federal ministers from Canada at the table, working with the Jay Treaty Border Alliance, and trying to make sure that these rights stay intact, and that Canada starts to reconcile or implement some of those abilities for our U.S. born brothers and sisters and family members, right? It's such a disparity, like depending on where you're born, what you're entitled to, and what you're eligible for. So to be able to get some kind of legislation, that's what we were pushing for, instead of, some kind of policy where if the next government comes in, they could just, eradicate it. So we wanted something long term, something permanent. I know it's still being worked on. Regional Chief of Ontario, Abram Benedict, who was formerly the Grand Chief of Akwesasne, him and I were working hand in hand, and also with the co-chair, who was the chief of the St. Regis Mohawk tribe on the state side. So it's funny, all of the co-chairs were all Mohawks from different communities, when the Jay Treaty Border Alliance brings, nations and tribes on both sides of the border, right across Canada, United States, all the way to the West Coast. So it just goes to show our resilience and our strength in being able to bang the table and try to really push for, all of our people.
Yeah. And maybe take us up to date today. You're doing, when you're not speaking at conferences, you're consulting, and you've got a couple of firms of your own that you're engaged with.
Yep. So in July 2024, as I mentioned, I ran again for Grand Chief. I wasn't successful in my reelection, so I took the summer off, which was a much needed recharge. And as I was sitting on my back porch in the summer, just soaking up the sun and thinking about, what's going to be my next chapter, I was like, well, you know what? I love doing what I do. I love being out there meeting other people, seeing what other nations are doing, where we're advancing in economic development or governance, and like I said, creating better opportunities for the next generation of youth that are up and coming. So I wanted to go out there and share my story, to inspire other young people who might be maybe worried about their identity, who they are, and being shamed, or not thinking that they can reach, being a grand chief or being anything they want for that matter, right? Because I know how it is growing up in a small community. There's a lot of bullying, there's a lot of lateral violence, right? There's a lot of hurt people, and it's going to take us time to get over, what we've been through. Um, but that comes with work, and it comes with healing, and it comes with, seeing role models also. So I launched Skydeer Consulting, and whether I'm actually consulting or if I'm just out there, like I said, being a public speaker, getting on panels, wanting to talk about the different milestones and achievements that we've made here in Ganawage, to tell other First Nations that it's possible, and other nations are doing great things as well. So, just to be able to share that information, that knowledge, we should all be striving to lift each other up. And yeah, so that's what I started to do in August. And it happened where I launched Skydeer Consulting was at a CCIB networking event. So I was immediately surrounded by, other consultants or professionals who said, you know what, this is great. I want to support you. I want to help you. And, I immediately had a resource base to help push me along. And then, a couple of months later, that's when I was offered a position at Dable Advisory and Consulting Services to be vice president and help them along as well. But they already came with a team of 18. So what, in essence, how we help each other is I have the network, they have all of the resources and the team and a whole service offering that I don't have, right? I mean, I bring to the table what I bring to the table, my experience, my knowledge from 15 years in public service and politics, and just life experience as well, right? I mean, I did go to school. Like I said, I have that bachelor's degree in psychology. So understanding people and relationships, that's my strength. So when I jokingly say, yeah, all my forefathers were iron workers, but I'm a bridge builder, but with people. And that's kind of been, my strength in going across the country and just generating this amazing network. And I feel like I'm just at the tip of something even greater. Like I was even featured on the cover of Forward magazine last week at the Forward Summit West in Calgary.
Calgary, right?
And, just people coming up to me and even asking me to autograph their magazine. I was like, oh my God, this is a little bit of a shock.
Yeah.
But, if people look at you as a role model and somebody that, is going to do something with their lives, like I'm always saying, there's so many people who have so much passion and they want to do something for their nation, for their community, but they just don't know how. And I'm telling them there's all kind of resources, and all you have to have is an idea and belief that you can make it happen, and find the right people, and you can make great things happen. And so that's kind of what I'm trying to help do, whether it's through Skydeer or through Dable, is go into nations and communities, inspire them, help them set up whatever it is that they need to continue to strive and grow and build up their people, build up their nation, build up their community, build their economy. And we do have a lot of brilliant people. It's just they haven't been given the opportunity. We weren't given the ability to apply for funding or to get loans in the past. It's such a different time that I've seen in the changes in the last 10 to 15 years. And it's really inspiring. So I think we're going to see a lot more success stories. I mean, even when I was there in London talking about the Haisla Cedar LNG project and, getting to meet Chief Crystal and just her experience. I mean, there's another formidable woman leader who's making great things happen for her people. And the stories are just going to continue to mount. So it's a really exciting time we're in.
It sure is, and that's what brought me back to Canada. Exactly, just that. Maybe we should talk a little bit about some of the projects you're most proud of at the time when you were Grand Chief. I think you mentioned Hydro-Québec in that partnership. Maybe tell us a little bit about how that came about and what is it?
Okay, so HERTAL, or Champlain Hudson Power Express line, is a line that runs from a substation here in La Prairie. Like you said, it's on our unceded traditional territory, runs all the way down Highway 15, connects at the border, and all the way down 87 into basically all through the Adirondacks, upstate New York, and into New York City. It connects at Queens, Astoria, but it will ultimately connect to the grid there and power 1 million homes with clean, renewable hydroelectricity. So at the time, I guess they had been considering, this project for a good 12 years. And then when the previous Grand Chief had heard about the project, he was like, well, you got to include us in this. You're going to be cutting through our backyard and in our unceded traditional historical territory. So, we want to be involved. And at the time, we had already been working on reconciling some of the historical wrongs, I guess, from the community. Like, there was all this major infrastructure and tower lines in our territory that weren't being utilized. So they were decommissioned and they wanted them removed. So that happened. And then for the ones that were still existing, getting fair compensation, even going back retroactively and, getting some compensation for that. So the relationship with Hydro-Québec had already started to rebuild and repair itself. And then when this project started, I became Grand Chief right in the middle of all of the negotiations and I guess, trying to get approvals from NYSERDA, which is like the regulatory body out there, and then environmental justice groups that weren't too keen on the project. So here comes a Mohawk woman out there talking about Honda Gariwadekwa, the interconnectedness of all things and us being in balance and wanting to, as protectors of the environment and the natural world, being involved in this project and being co-owners of the infrastructure and what it would mean to our community. It's a deal for 40 years. We were guaranteed a 10% equity, 10% stake in the project, but with the ability to purchase up to 49%. So it was historic and groundbreaking because it's the first time in this province specifically, where you had a First Nation being co-owners of a major infrastructure with a Crown corporation, to the point where they even had to go to Quebec City at the National Assembly and, give my, I guess, expression of how important that this was going to be for the relationship between, the Native people in the province and with the government. To again, they had to modify legislation to allow it to happen, and it did go through. The approvals happened through NYSERDA, so everything went accordingly, and we penned this historic deal.
And the project, it's the transmission line? Is it the power? Is it the generation as well? Is that part of it?
Well, that's part of the purchase of the equity stake, I think.
And is it just Mohawks of Ganawagi involved? Any other First Nations part of this one?
No, this is just us. And that's why I think a lot of those EJ groups were like saying, well, what about the nations whose land was flooded historically to allow, hydro dams and like all of that environmental destruction, and why are only you benefiting and so forth. We said, look, we can't go back in history and undo what happened, but we can move forward and we could be that kind of intermediary with Hydro-Québec to say, you've done your best to restore relations with the Mohawks of Ganawagi, but what about the other nations? What about the Innu? What about the Cree? What about the Naskapi? There's all these nations that they're still, all this historical unjust that happened with them, and you got to work on it. And then at the time when the hydro project on our end was starting to get momentum was when Sophie Brochu was the CEO. It was the first time Hydro-Québec had ever had a woman CEO, and it was the first time, like I said, there was a woman Grand Chief, myself, here in Kahnawake. And when we first started meeting, we said the approach that we have to take on this project has to be different. We got to think outside the box. It's got to be people first, relationships first, not always about bottom line, because once you have that, because no one had really been considering the relations with First Nation. It was just like, we have business to do, we want to expand, we need to grow, and we're just going to do what we have to do, and we'll give them a, impact benefit agreement, a one-time payout, and go about our business. But that's not the reality of, what nations want to see anymore. And they want to be partners, and they want to have participation. They want their people to be able to develop economies of scale based on, these projects that are going through their territories. And it was never really fair. And I think now that we have the opportunity to get in the play box, or the sandbox, I'll say, and be able to participate, people are going to see a major shift, like I said, because we're brilliant people. We bring something different to the table. Mark, I impressed you with this two-eyed seeing, vision of the way we need to go into the future now, with taking, the gifts and strengths of what the non-Indigenous bring to the table and bringing it in balance with our worldview of, the interconnectedness of all things, and our environmental stewardship and responsibility to our mother, the earth, and how we need to have those things be in balance. And it works. We find win-win situations now. And it's just going to be, I think, the trajectory moving forward.
And did you see from that time a change in Hydro-Quebec's approach to their future projects?
Absolutely.
I understand this was a real inflection point for everybody.
Yep, absolutely. They came up with an Indigenous strategy. Actually, a new CEO ended up coming in. Sophie Brochu didn't see eye to eye with one of the environment ministers that had been appointed by Quebec, and she resigned her position. And then a new guy came in, Michael Sabia, which I was at first like, oh my God, I hope he has the same kind of vision and sentiment that Sophie did. And he really did. And happy to call him, a friend. I text him every now and then. We got to do a panel together at the Major Projects Coalition in Toronto a couple of weeks ago.
That was a great panel, by the way. I've seen Michael speak before. I've never seen him so engaged as he was talking to you about the Hydro-Québec project. And when the session finished, he was upset because he had a lot more he wanted to talk about and say. And so you definitely have developed a close relationship.
And he's sincere and he's real. And what he says, he means. And because now, they have this ambitious strategy by 2035 and all the projects that they want to do to ensure, Quebec's moving toward net zero and wanting to make sure that we have the energy supply needed going into the future. This approach now that, we trailblazed as the Mohawks of Kahnawake is now kind of like an expected standard, right? And nations are coming to us saying, how did you get this? And, help us. And, although I'm not a part of the MCK anymore, I had gone to CDPQ, right, the investment fund here in the province, to talk about the potential of us kind of creating a partnership to be able to fund other First Nations who want to buy larger amounts of equity stake, and showing them how we were able to get this project done with hydro. And yeah, so we, like I said, we're definitely going to see the success stories continue, because there's partners, there's willingness to collaborate, there's thinking outside of the box. There's already kind of been this trailblazing that has happened. So this is the trail we're on now. And you're only going to see First Nations participate more in these major projects, major infrastructure, and it's about time, right? And I think as the original peoples of these lands, we should be able to share in the success and the wealth. I'll say that gets generated by these major projects. There's so many billions of dollars being thrown around, whether it's through mining, logging, like I said, all of these different projects. And now energy is a big space where we're seeing First Nations participation. But it has to also impact, the broader community. Like when we talk about the planning, I think for the next 40 years for this community and, what is the revenue is going to be used for. Although we are very advanced, there's still a lot of needs. There's a lot of infrastructure needs. There's half of the community still runs off of well and septic at the extremities of the territory. So they're not tied to our water system. There's needs for our language and culture revitalization. There's elders services. There's we have a laundry list. We need more office space, because we're growing as professionals and business people. To develop our lands. We did have a major return of almost 350 acres from the Quebec government when they built the Highway 30. So we have a lot of commercial lands that can be developed into some major, revenue generating projects for the community. And just to completely elevate, everybody's quality of life here in the territory. So always striving for that, more education programs, more programs for our kids, sports programs. I mean, that's always been already at the forefront of everything, but that's why the Cultural Arts Center is so important, because not every child plays sports. And we know that we have those who like to act and to sing. And, when we think about our cultural songs and dances and all of that, that needs to come back as well.
Yeah, well done. Congratulations on that deal and everything you're working on since. You are a great role model. And it's been a pleasure to talk to you today. Nyawa and Goa. Thank you very much.
Yeah, Nyawa.
Great to have you with us.
And we'll see you again soon, I'm sure. Until then, take care, be well.
Hope to see you again next April.
I'll be
back
there
in London.
I absolutely
Fantastic.
love London, and I will be back.
Thank you to Kahsennenhawe Sky Deer for sharing her insights with us. And thank you for viewing and listening. Be sure to share, subscribe, and leave a review on your favorite podcast channel. Thanks for listening to Drumbeats. Until next time.